A professor, as you know, is someone who has earned the respect of their colleagues. A professor is a teacher, a researcher, and a mentor, and Professor John Domitrovich certainly fits that bill. On his bio, he tells us that he studied anthropology and sociology at the Montana College of Mineral Science and Technology and the University of Montana. He's been interested in culture and cultures of the world and was a Peace Corps volunteer in Ghana. He's received 3 Fulbright scholarships to do research in India, Brazil, China, and Tibet. He has a passion for various religious beliefs and has conducted research on many new religious movements in the United States, including the Church Universal and Triumphant, the Hutterites, the Amish, Hare Krishna, Baha'i, and the Aryan Nations. Prior to his teaching career at SKC, John was a social worker for the state of Montana for 18 years. He's taught at Salish Kootenai College for the past 21 years in human services and social work. He is currently quasi-retired and lives in Missoula with his wife and 3 children. Please welcome Professor John Domitrovich.
Well, I guess I don't have to stand in front of that thing, so thanks for coming, and thank you, Luana, for the nice introduction, and I want to thank you for suggesting this topic to me. As we were talking earlier, it was the research that I was involved with the Aryan Nations actually pretty well ended about 12 years ago, so, and I forgot about 3/4 of it, so in the forgetful state that I'm in most of the time. But anyway, it was kind of nice to review, and reflect on kind of that past in my life that I hadn't really thought too much about before. So anyway, a little background, first of all, on where this whole thing started. It was in 1991, a good friend of mine, Rob Balch from the sociology department at the University of Montana, he had a class called Extraordinary Groups, and part of that class, Rob has been one that never takes anything for granted just because it's written in a book. He still questions it, so he believes that it's important to go out and actually experience these groups. And so I hooked up with Rob. I've been friends of his maybe about 20 years, but over the years we've done a lot of visiting different groups, new religious movements across the Northwest. And anyway, in this class, he put it out to the students. He said, what do you want to do for field trips? So he does a lot of field trips. He wants to go there and let the students experience firsthand what these groups are like. And somebody raised their hand and said, well, how about the Aryan Nations over in Idaho? And Rob said, well, I don't know. I've never approached them. I don't even know if we could, even be allowed on the compound. And he said, but I'll call. So he called, and it just so happened about the time, in retrospect, we found out that they were trying to straighten up their image a little bit, get away from the neo-Nazi look, and a number of the people were going a little bit more mainstream. They were running for public office on school boards and so on and so forth. I know about that time here in this area up on the res, there was an individual, I don't remember his name, but he also was running for school board until somebody got word that he was actually associated with the far right, and that pretty much stopped his campaign. But anyway, Rob called over and they said, sure, come on over, bring some students, make sure everybody has ID. And so Rob said, fine, and it just so happened that they were having what was called the World Congress that summer, which was taking place every summer in July, and they invited all the good racists from all over the world, essentially. There was KKK from down south, KKK from all over the United States. There were neo-Nazi groups from the United States, and up in Canada, there were even people who would come from overseas. I know at one meeting there were some people there from Italy. And anyway, that started all. Rob called me and he said, you want to go? And I said, sure, and so that started it. We started doing research. We went to the World Congresses, and then The Aryan Nations also had a youth assembly that they had every year that was on the anniversary of Hitler's birthday in April. And so started attending them, and we would just stop in impromptu once in a while for church services on Sunday with Pastor Butler, and we attended the marches in Coeur d'Alene and so on and so forth. So I was involved from 91 up until about maybe 2000 or 2001. Rob finally published an article after Pastor Butler died in 2004. He didn't want to publish anything before that, but he finally published an article that kind of gave the history of the Aryan Nations up till the time that Pastor Butler passed away at the age of, I think he was 86. So anyway, this is the basis for my talk. So I'm going to switch between, I have a few things on PowerPoint, and then I'm going to go back to the old slides that I had. Okay, sometimes people refer to a lot of the racist groups as the racist right, the far right groups, or sometimes the radical right. And essentially, that term refers to groups or persons who hold somewhat extreme nationalistic, xenophobic, fear of strangers, racist, religious fundamentalist, or revolutionary views. And essentially, the Aryan Nations group would fit under, obviously, the racist grouping there, the idea that they are racist. They are racist. They try to diminish the word racism by calling it racialism, but essentially it's the same thing. It's just a euphemism for being a racist. The idea of racism includes the idea that you can take humanity and on the basis of biological criteria, you can separate those humanity into different subgroupings that are mutually exclusive. So the idea that each subgrouping will have a set of unique and distinct biological characteristics that none of the other subgroupings will have. And so that was an idea that really played itself out in the 18th century. And a lot of the anthropologists and people who studied fossils and so on were involved in measuring a lot of different aspects of the human body at the time, and to see, based on biology, if they could come up with these unique and distinct groupings. And essentially what they found out was after maybe 75 years, 100 years, you couldn't do that. There was too much blending. It wasn't a set of discrete subspecies. Essentially, it was a continuum where there's a lot of overlapping between groups. You change the biological characteristic you look at, you get a whole different set of groupings or subgroupings. So essentially the idea of racism, the original idea of racism, or not racism, of racial groups, didn't fly. But that doesn't mean that everybody agrees with that. And so the Aryan Nations and a lot of the racist right would say that you can take humanity in general and you can split them up into different groupings based on biology, and that you can impose upon that another dimension based on particular criteria of superiority and inferiority. So, and usually the members of the racist group in question, they're always members of the superior group, of course. So sometimes, they say that they are superior intellectually. So Pastor Butler, I remember the first time that I listened to him in church, and he made reference to those stinking niggers. Those stinking niggers who never would have developed culture if it hadn't been for the white man. That they just were intellectually inferior, according to Pastor Butler. And, or that, the members of the superior group are a lot stronger. The character, their moral fiber is much more morally correct, and so on and so forth. So that's the kind of a thought process that the racist right has, and that's the kind of thought process that we found with the Aryan Nations. Okay, as I was reflecting on this, looking back on the research, there was a couple of ladies that we met over in Hayden Lake, Betty Dobranitz and Stephanie Shanks-Miley, who they were engaged in a 6-year study of the racist right, and we met them over there and talked with them a little bit, but they published a book based on that. And essentially in their book, they make the point that instead of talking about white power, that from their perspective and from their research, it was more important to look at the far right, the racist right, in terms of a focus on separatism, not so much white power. That when they were doing their research in the latter 90s, and I think the book was published in 1999 or 2000, they were saying that from their perspective that the racist right had already accepted that they weren't going to go back to segregation, they weren't going to go back to a point where slavery, where the whites were in power over the blacks. They weren't going to go back to a situation like in South Africa under apartheid, where the Afrikaners are ruling the roost. That wasn't an option at that point. But what they were looking at was having their own little territorial imperative, creating their own little area where all the members of the Aryans could come in and live, and they could live their lives separate from all the other inferior, according to them, inferior social groups. So the idea of staking out a Northwest imperative or a territorial imperative, that seems to be, was the dominant theme that they got from their research. And we heard that a lot up with the Aryan Nations also. So, this is just a little image that, that idea of not mixing, the idea of being separate, keeping yourself separate, keeping the gene pool pure, unpolluted, and not participating in interbreeding or miscegenation with members of other groups. So this is just kind of a play on that. This is a neo-Nazi group out of California. Put this out. And I don't know how clear this is, but this is another, this is put out by a fellow by the name of Bob Miles. But you can see here, you have the red lines. That indicates the areas or the directions where a lot of so-called mud people of color, coming into the United States and, quote, polluting the gene pool. And so you obviously have a lot of people coming from down south, eastern seaboard, western seaboard, and a few places up north. But according to a lot of these people, the least polluted, the least interracial mixing is found in the Northwest. So you can see that wide area up there. So this is the idea that the Aryan Nations had, staking out a territorial imperative. And that's why Pastor Butler in the early 70s, he actually came from California. He was a member of the Church of Jesus Christ Christian in California, and it was headed by a fellow by the name of Wesley Swift. After Wesley Swift died, he bought some land, 20 acres of land up in Hayden Lake, and came up in this area because in his mind, it was an area that was the least tainted, the least polluted by the so-called inferior racial groups. So he had this idea of, bringing everybody into the Northwest, members of the Aryan racial groups, and gaining political power, and then gradually moving those inferior people out and establishing a territorial imperative, sometimes called the Northwest Bastion, and then fighting to keep creating a closed system and keeping all those people out of the gene pool. Sometimes, this idea of having a non-polluted area, a territorial imperative, took on a number of different casts. So sometimes it included the northwestern United States, also Canada, sometimes Alaska. David Duke, and I don't remember if you remember David Duke, but he had run for state senate in Louisiana, and actually I think he was a senator, and I think actually he was in Congress for a short time. He also ran for president, but he had he had a different notion, again, based on the idea of separating everybody out. So the Jews would be in one place in the United States, the whites would be in one place, and then the blacks would be in another place. And he also had a place down centered on Arizona called Navajona, where Native Americans would go. And it's really unusual to even see that, because in 10 years research with the Aryan Nations, we never ever heard, nobody ever heard anybody slam Native Americans, not once. And it was real strange, and we asked a lot of people, what's going on here? Where do they fit in? And the interesting thing was, is as we were there longer and longer, we found out that they believe, at least the Aryan Nations believe, that some Native American groups are members of the Aryan Nations racist groups. And I think Pastor Butler is probably part Native American. That's my belief. It's rumored that its predecessor, Wesley Swift, was part Native American. So some pretty interesting things there going on. Here's another one. It's not just the whites who have this idea of, coming up with separate areas where you can stake your claim to your existence. Louis Farrakhan with the Nations of Islam also, they'd like to do that. So, give the whiteys their white American bastion there on the left, and we'll create a buffer zone, and we'll patrol the buffer zone, make sure that those boundaries aren't crossed. And then the blacks would take everything to the right. They'd get rid of D.C., which probably wouldn't be a bad idea. I'd help them do that. And then, but they would create the center of the Nation of Islam would be in Chicago. They would call it the New Mecca. And then the Jews would be have a little sliver at the top, and they call that ZOG, Zionist Occupational Government. And actually, one of the better-known racist leaders from California, Tom Metzger, he's the leader of a group called WAR, White Aryan Resistance. He was meeting with Farrakhan and talking about joining forces to create such a setup as this. Okay, the Aryan Nations group, they have a belief that's centered around what's called Christian identity. Not all racists follow Christian identity. There's a lot of groups that don't, but the Aryan Nations do. And essentially, it had its origin, this whole belief system had its origin in 19th century Britain, and at that time it was called British Israelism or Anglo-Israelism. And it's based on the idea of way back, like in the 5th century before Christ, the Assyrians, who were then in northern Iraq, came over and fought with and captured and took members of the 10 northern tribes of Israel. I think they were the descendants of Jacob. They took them supposedly and took them back to Assyria, present-day northern Iraq, and nobody knows for sure whatever happened to these people. What British Israelism came up with, they said, well, we know what's happened, and they allegedly used linguistic data, archaeological data, to show that these 10 lost tribes of Israel actually moved out over the Caucasus Mountains and went up and ended up populating northern Europe, Scandinavian countries, Western Europe, and ultimately made their way over to England and Ireland, and who obviously it was the dominant ethnic group that came and populated America, setting up the Republic. So they say that the 10 lost tribes, those people actually were the descendants. Us people who came from the northern European, Western European countries are descendants of the 10 lost tribes, and that we are the true Israelites. The two other tribes of Judah that weren't taken by the Assyrians, who later were taken over into Babylon and came back and restored the temple and so on, the ancestors of the present day Jews aren't the true Jews that are mentioned in the Bible. That the 10 lost tribes actually are the people who have a covenant with God, and that they will play a major role, prophetic role in help running and ruling the kingdom of God on earth for the 1,000-year period after the second advent of Christ. So they put themselves into this kind of a real important role. So again, the core beliefs, they're the offspring of the tribes of Israel according to the Bible. And the Jews are actually the remnants or descendants of the southern two tribes, but they're aligned with the forces of evil. They're not good. They're not good at all. And the Christian identity people are adamantly negative towards the Jews. They hate the Jews. They believe that the Jews are the personification of cosmic evil in the world. And they believe that they're out to turn this world into one big mass of decadence, of evil. And so they pit themselves against the Jews. And there's a passage in the Bible that they say really brings this out, where Jesus said to the Jews, "Ye are of your father the devil, and the lusts of your father will do. He was a murderer from the beginning, and abode not in truth, because there is no truth in him. When he speaketh a lie, he speaketh of his own, for he is a liar and the father of it." So they pit this whole scenario, the idea that the remnants of the 10 lost tribes of Israel, in this kind of an ultimate battle between the forces of good and evil. And so they tie that in with what's called premillennial thought. It's a form of eschatology, what's going to happen at the end times. Premillennialism is the idea that Christ will make his second advent before the installation of the 1,000-year period of peace, justice, hope, love, tranquility, and then there will be the final judgment. But they believe that they will play a prophetic role in help ruling that kingdom for that 1,000-year period. So that was what was really interesting to me, because I'm interested in religious belief systems. So that's what fascinated me and kind of hooked me, and I was really interested in how the political arm of Aryan Nations was intertwined with the religious arm. So this two-seed theory. So a lot of identity people believe in the two-seed theory. The Church of Jesus Christ Christian, the Aryan Nations group out of Idaho, they believe in the two-seed theory. So if you look at this, the two seeds are two seeds of Eve. And so you have one seed, the good seed of Eve, you have Adam and Eve mating, and that leads to Abel, and on down Seth, and on down to what they believe are the members of the Aryan Nations racist group. Again, Northern European, Western European countries. You start coming down more towards the Mediterranean area, it gets kind of shaky. People get a little more skin color and so on and so forth. Southern European countries, they're usually not considered members of the Aryan Nations group. The other seed of Eve, the bad seed, they say that the story of Adam and Eve isn't metaphorical. It's actual fact. They take it literal. They say that there was a bad seed of Eve and that Lucifer actually mated with Eve, and that led to Cain, and on down, but led to ultimately to the Jewish people. There's a little variant on this where some people say, well, it wasn't actually Lucifer mating with Eve that produced the Jews. It was just that Cain was just he was bad seed, and he was the first interracial mixer who mixed with a number of inferior groups that existed before the creation, as mentioned in the Bible. They were called pre-Adamites, the so-called people of color. So the blacks and so on, that they were a separate groups that already existed prior to the story of Genesis in the Bible. So they would say that Cain, because he was the first interracial mixer, ultimately that Lucifer wasn't involved. It was just because he intermixed that ultimately led to a bad group of people, the Jews. So again, at the bottom, however you look at it, it shakes out into this forces of good versus the forces of evil, just like in Star Wars. Kind of interesting. Premillennialism. So all of this stuff dovetails into premillennial thought, which is it's not a form of unusual thinking at all. Millions and millions of Christians in America believe in premillennialism. The idea that they expect the second advent of Christ to take place. And when we did the research, a lot of those expectations actually centered around the end of the millennium, the year 2000. So a lot of people were saying, yep, Christ is coming. Christ is coming, and we're going to be help ruling the kingdom of God on earth for a 1,000-year period. We're going to be sitting at the right hand of Christ, and we're going to help rule this whole thing, this whole show. Or some people would say, well, it might happen in 2000, but if not 2000, it's going to be in my lifetime. It's going to happen soon. So the idea there is essentially it's based on this death, rebirth symbolism. They have a period before the second advent of Christ called the tribulation, and it's roughly a 7-year period. And the idea is that from the original creation, society and humanity and the world essentially has devolved. It's gone downhill. So history is a story of the progression of universal ruin. From ultimate perfection, it's gone downhill. And the idea, a lot of people are saying that we're in the tribulation now, or we were in the tribulation leading up to the year 2000. We're at the bottom of the barrel. And people over in Hayden Lake would say, look around you. You can tell that, we're in this state of absolute decay. Look at, premarital sex. Look at divorce. Look at women's rights. Holy cow. How bad can that be? Sodomy, abortion, gay rights. Oh my God, how terrible. Interracial mixing. Look around you. People are mixing with other racial groups. Affirmative action. Secular humanism. An emphasis on science instead of on religion. Focus on a focus on the use of science to gain the truth instead of a focus on literal rendition of the Bible to gain the truth. Governmental corruption. Boy, some things don't change. And they would say, you look at it, everything is corrupt. The educational system. It's run by a cabal of Jews out in Washington, D.C. They're responsible for all the evil in the world. The justice system, based on the Jews set up the justice system instead of the justice system. They're responsible for all this stuff. After all, they're aligned with the forces of evil. And so they would say, don't shy away from it, embrace it, go with it, fight against it, engage yourself in the battle. And there was also, some people believe that they wouldn't have to go through the tribulation, that there would be what's called a rapture. And there's different variations of the rapture. There's a pre-tribulation rapture. Well, some people who are the elect of God will, in a twinkling of an eye, they'll be ushered up into the spiritual world, and then they'll come back with Christ after the Battle of Armageddon and help rule the kingdom of God for 1,000 years. Some people say it's going to be mid-trib, so they have to endure all this decadence for maybe 3.5 years, and then they'll be ushered up into heaven. Some people say, well, they got to endure the full 7 years, and then they'll be ushered up in heaven and zip back down again with the second advent of Christ. So you get all these different perspectives on it. Okay. So let's switch over here to the slides. This kind of gives you an idea of how they tend to see the Jews. And all these images are things that we grabbed over the 10-year period in Hayden Lake and elsewhere. So you've got the stereotypic Jew with the big nose, the hook nose, the eagle beak. And that seems to be a real common caricature that was utilized by a lot of the racist groups. It was also utilized by Hitler, and he would take it one step further, and he would, in his propaganda films, he would show a rats coming out of the gutter, with the long nose, and then he would switch to Jewish people walking down the street with the big nose, and then he would superimpose an image of a rat with the rat's face with the big nose, but it was actually a human face, the Jew face, with the body of a rat. So trying to assimilate the Jews to the world of animality. They're not human, they're animals, they're vermin. So that's a real typical ploy that they used. And the interesting thing is research shows that only something like 17% of Jews actually even have a nose like that. It's not even a pattern. It's not the dominant pattern at all. But here they're responsible for everything that's bad in the world, and they're running Washington. They're running the Federal Reserve. They're in control of the monetary system. They're responsible for the corrupt educational system. They're responsible for pornography. They're responsible for the unjust justice system. You name it. This was out of an Aryan Nation coloring book. And, but again, playing on the stereotypic Jew, they're all pedophiles. This was actually the last march in Coeur d'Alene, but as they were marching down again, they had the sign, "Jewish treason governs America." And you go on the compound, you go into the church area, or into what they call the Hall of Honor, the Hall of Flags. And they have a Jewish flag just right out there, so you can trample on it. So it doesn't take you very long to figure out how they feel about Jews. So Hayden Lake, or the compound, was located about maybe 10 miles north of Coeur d'Alene. You'd head north towards Sandpoint, and you turn right and go off 2-3 miles, kind of rolling hills, kind of nice ponderosa pine hills, and you'd come to this logo, the symbol of the Aryan Nations racist group. This is a little bit out of order. It should have been before this. But again, this is after Schindler's List came out, so 6 million murdered in gas chambers, and that, boy, these kites would sure be lost without their phony Holocaust. So this idea of revisionism, that again you got the stereotypic Jew, that the idea that they're evil people, and that the Holocaust never really happened. They trumped this whole thing up to gain world pity. And essentially, that's the line that they spew out over in Hayden Lake. This is the same thing. So revisionism, the idea that the Holocaust was a fraud. So the good Jew is at the lower right with the hole in his head. So anyway, getting back on track here. You're near the compound, so if you just happen to be out there driving around and you come to this, my race is my religion, so right away you start going. Before I went there the first time, I had no idea religion was even involved. But right away, the race is my religion. Yeah. Non-Aryans don't go in here. So you go up here and you see all these flags, and the flags actually represent what in their minds are those the flags of the nations that belong to have that sense of identity, members of the Aryan Nations racist group, the remnants of the 10 lost tribes of Israel. So you can see all these flags. And summertime for the World Congress, right to the right here, there would always be law enforcement, a lot of cars. There'd be a lot of young bucks, usually with their shirts off, muscle bound. They'd have name tags. They'd be taking pictures of everybody, taking license plates down, getting pictures of people as they're driving by, and pictures of cars. You drive up this little road and you come to this guardhouse here. And if you knew that they didn't like Jews before you went there, you'd go, what the heck is going on here? Whites only, Church of Jesus Christ Christian. I thought they hated Jews. Well, they don't believe that Christ was a Jew. They believe Christ was a member of the Aryan Nations racist group. They don't believe that he was had any connection at all to the two southern tribes of Judah. Judah and I think it's Jacob? No, not Jacob. Anyway, the two southern tribes that were the ancestors to present-day Jews. So you come up here and they have this little thing, I don't know what you call it, but it's like a railroad thing to stop the cars going across the track. And so there'd usually be a couple of people there, and you pay a $35 fee to get in. Usually they'd be in uniform, sometimes they'd have pistols. Sometimes there'd be rifles in the corner. I remember one time they were filming on a video camera. And but they're the people that watch the gate here. Okay, this was, I think this is actually from '91, the first trip. You get into the compound and 20 acres, lots of ponderosa pine. Not too much there really, and I remember the first time I went, I had this image in my mind before going there that there would be huge barbed wire fences. There would be guys running around with bullets everywhere and rifles and German shepherds, baring their teeth, wanting to rip you apart. And it wasn't that way. It wasn't that way at all. The perimeter of the compound, they have like 3 strands of fence where you could step over it. You just step over it. They had one German shepherd dog on the first trip. His name was Garth, and his greatest joy was chasing pine cones. It was really different than what I expected it would be. So, living on a compound at that time, there were probably 5 or 6 people. But for the World Congress, the most that we ever counted there for the World Congress, and usually we'd try to take a body count at the cross lighting. The most we ever counted there, I think it was like 170 or 180 people. And that was the time when they did the first march down the streets of Coeur d'Alene. So, but Butler came up from California in 1973. Kept the church going, Church of Jesus Christ Christian. I guess it was like in '81. They built the church in '81. Somebody put a bomb on one side of the church and blew up part of the church. And they think they know who it was. They believe it was an important person in the Jewish League. I think that's what it was called. But nobody was ever charged with it. So they have the church. At that time, after the bombing, they put up this 30-foot tower so they could kind of keep an eye on what was going on. And at the Congress, they will always drape, flags, kind of like Hitler did. They'll do that for the gathering. Really kind of a nice area. Right from this area, they have a place where you could camp. They had a few bunk houses. There was a bookstore, Pastor Butler's house, and that was about it. Not too much really on the compound. So here we have the church. I think this pretty much epitomizes. You have the Church of Jesus Christ Christian, the political wing, Aryan Nations, by the guard tower, and then you've got the church, Church of Jesus Christ Christian. So you've got the two, which I think makes for a dangerous mix. You have a racist group, but they buttress their beliefs by religious beliefs. That makes it pretty scary, I think. Makes it even more dangerous. This was a couple of the students. Rob would take a couple students. I never took any students over from here. So these were 2 sociology students, and Rachel on the left is now an attorney, but they really, really opened up to the girls. One thing we realized, you take a couple good-looking women, guys are guys. It doesn't matter if they're racist or not. And these guys are just getting all kinds of information. They were tripping over one another to try and get and talk with them. Particularly when you have a blonde and she was blue-eyed, they thought that was great. So this is the church. Here, there's a stained glass window there. So that one end of that thing was dynamited, I guess, in the early 80s. You walk to go get in the church. First, you have to go through another room. It's called the Hall of Honor, and or the Hall of Flags. And again, so they have flags that represent what, in their minds, would be the members of the Aryan Nations racist group. So this was on the first trip. I ended up at that time taking my son. I tried to take my kids to, at least one of them, to whatever group I went to. And in retrospect, they really liked that. But I took Nick, and Nick now is, he's 33 or something like that, and he's an attorney for Mike McGrath, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, Montana Supreme Court, over in Helena. But at the time, I remember after this, asking him on the way home, I said, "What do you think, Nick, about these people?" And he said, "Pretty damn boring people." He thought they were pretty boring. And that's kind of the tempo of it, for the most part. It was like sitting around with a bunch of guys, or going to the M&M bar in Butte or something like that. Sitting around with primarily more middle-aged, perhaps older people, although there were always skinheads. There were always a number of skinheads at the congresses, and usually there was a skinhead or two who was just passing through, and Butler would put them up, for a month or two. And so they'd live off the good graces of Pastor Butler. But anyway, this is the Hall of Flags. This is the church. So you go in the Hall of Flags and you turn right and you go into the church. This is where most of the action would take place for the World Congress. And we learned real quick not to sit in front. Most people didn't know who we were. We didn't know a lot of the people there. And so the safest spot was always in the back. We could see what was going on, and unless they turned around, they wouldn't pay any attention to us. We didn't have to explain anything. Oftentimes, somebody would be talking, and the whole group would raise up and go, "White power! Sig Heil!" And we never did that. But we were sitting in the back, and if we were sitting in the front, we would have been in trouble. We would have had to explain some stuff, Anyway, some interesting things here. It was kind of interesting at first to see the juxtaposition of crosses with, runes and swastikas. And the swastika is always, back then, was a symbol that carried some real negative connotations for me. But I've learned that it really is a good symbol. It's one of the oldest symbols. It's a symbol that's found in some of the first cities, Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro in the Indus Valley area, and it was a good symbol. It was a symbol of plenitude, of goodness, of being. It was a solar symbol, used in some of the basketry, some of the Southwest Indians. It's a good symbol. Unfortunately, Hitler gave it kind of a bad rep. You see a sword there, and at different points here, somebody wanted to take an oath of fealty to the movement, they would take the sword and hold it up to the cross and swear their oath of allegiance to Yahweh. So we'd see that. We watched a couple of young couples get married here. They got married by Pastor Butler. So anyway, this was the place where the action occurred, for the most part. This was a fellow by the name of Newman Britton. He was from a group down in California, and he was probably one of the more interesting people to listen to. He reminded us of the stereotypical religious rioters. He would scream and yell and get red in the face. We expected him to have a heart attack, but he was kind of fun to listen to. You see, you have a bust of Hitler here. A lot of interesting pictures on the wall and so on that tend to emphasize some of their beliefs. I think probably for the most part, most people who are at the services and a lot of people were more middle-aged, a lot of them working class, and not a lot of young people. People would bring their families though, and they would bring their young kids, and that was the thing that was kind of hard to watch. Socializing the kids into this whole stream of racist beliefs. Again, they would have the Aryan Youth Assembly on the anniversary of Hitler's birthday in April. I attended one of these. I never really felt comfortable around the skinheads too much, although we partied with some to get information and drank beer with some and so on and so forth. Butler started the Aryan Youth Assembly, And I think he finally stopped it like in '97 because the attendance had dropped to something like 50 or something like that. So, but these guys, they say that Aryans don't drink, they don't use drugs and so on and so forth. But these guys, they're in containers, they had booze and so on and so forth. And we had a friend who was doing his doctorate researching the sharp skins out of Portland, and he was at one of these, and he got slammed up against the car by one of these guys and accused of being an infiltrator. And Pastor Butler, we call him the Godfather, he told that guy to get off the compound. He said, there's no violence on the compound. He gave him 5 minutes to get off, and he said, don't ever come back. And so we never knew, we had to kind of watch what we were doing. We were able to ask questions. They're pretty blunt questions, but Rob always had to be sure that he wouldn't get somebody who was a firebrand and somebody who was going to lose it and lose control and get in a big argument and a knockdown drag out with somebody. So, we had to be somewhat respectful and but they were pretty open to our questions. These are some of the calling cards that were collected. So you can see where some of the folks are from, Arkansas and Missouri. So the themes here are purity and intimidation. This was a bookstore there, and this was a sign that they had up in the window. There are a lot of interesting bridging issues, I think, between this group and probably the racist right in general and the Christian right. They were anti-gay, they're anti-abortion, anti-women's rights, and so there are a lot of bridging issues there that they utilized in the recruitment. And they, having the Church of Jesus Christ Christian, they'd say, okay, hey, we're religious people just like you people are, and we share all these beliefs, so maybe we could agree on even some other things, So they use that as a recruitment tool. Oftentimes there were representatives, neo-Nazi groups who would come, and for the cross-lighting, they would dress up in the uniforms, and we had some real interesting experiences going in like Coeur d'Alene to pick up some skinheads, volunteering to do that, and having some of these guys ride along and then stop and get gas, and these guys are there with the uniforms. And so we got ourselves put into some pretty embarrassing situations at times, but kind of interesting. Here's a person taking the oath of fealty to the movement. So here you have kids at the cross lighting, and again, this was a hard part for me to see. But if you want a social movement to continue beyond this generation, you have to socialize these kids. You have to, if you want to do that. Kind of interesting that the young girls aren't doing the Sig Heil. Women had no formal membership in the Aryan Nations group. They weren't supposed to do any salutes. They were supposed to participate in some of the rituals. And essentially, what the women would be engaged in, they were the worker bees, they were the ones that were cooking the burgers for lunch, and other than that, they were just kind of peripheral for the most part. The exception to that was some of these skinheads. There were some female skinheads who'd come, and there was actually a few of them that participate in the marches. But they kind of looked at the stereotypic Christianite or Aryan Nations woman, older women, as just they looked at them with dismay. They just couldn't believe. They said, we got to be active. We can't be sitting here, doing white power potato salad. We need to be out there in the movement. So there was a lot of discord between the younger skinhead females and the older traditional Aryan women. Here's another little, you have a munchkin, so they're teaching this young kid, maybe 2-3 years old, how to do the Sig Heil, Hail Victory. This was kind of interesting, and I wasn't on this trip. One of these ladies, the lady to the left, is actually Jewish. Now, if they would have got wind of this, if they would somehow had learned that she's Jewish, everybody would have probably have been given 5 minutes to get off the compound and probably never would have been able to return. And she wanted to go, and she talked to Rob, and she went, and on the Congress usually starts on a Friday and ends on a Sunday. On a Saturday, she went there and she got so sick she started vomiting. Then, after the vomiting, she decided, well, I'm going to make the best of it, and she did. And then, so she was kind of a cutie, and so a lot of guys were paying attention to her. And then before they left on Sunday, this guy came up and he said, I want to have my picture with you. And so the way Rob explains it, they're standing there, and I don't know exactly how the conversation got on it, but this guy's standing there, and he made a statement. He said, I could smell a Jew a mile away. What he didn't know was that there was a Jew a couple inches away from him. So again, that idea that they believe that Jews are so stereotypical and biologically so different that they're obvious, you know, they're like the wart on your hand, but obviously it isn't true. They sell a lot of things. You can buy a lot of different things, patches and books, and they had a lot of things for sale from World War II. You can get Nazi knives and, you know, all kinds of stuff they'd put out to make a little money. This, on the first trip, this guy is actually Native American, the guy on the right, and this is one of the white nurses. So this is a group of people who are training to be nurses, so that some people believe that the only way that you're going to set up separate areas to live in is that there has to be a racial holy war, or they'll take the first two letters out of that racial holy war and they'll call it Rahowa, R-A-H-O-W-A. And so anyway, these nurses were preparing for that battle and to take care of the people, the casualties. But I think it's kind of interesting that just willy-nilly he's making a sign, but that's Pastor Butler over there. He's making like the sign of the horns. I mean, he wasn't doing it knowingly, but it's kind of interesting the way it came out. So that's Pastor Butler on the left, and first time I met him, I thought, this guy looks like he might be Native American to me. It's Newman Britton on the right, and then the chief of security there in the middle. There's another one of Pastor Butler. Pastor Butler was kind of a soft-spoken man. There were like two Pastor Butlers, I think. Talk with him. He was very soft-spoken, real grandfatherly, very kind-sounding, and he was pretty soft-spoken. And most people thought he was a very generous man. He came from California. He was an aerospace engineer. He was an inventor. I think he had a patent on self-inflatable tires in both the United States and in Canada. So he's a fairly bright guy. He fought during World War II. He was actually stationed in India, and I heard him make a couple statements saying that if he only would have known, he would have been fighting with the Germans and not against the Germans at the time. But soft-spoken guy, but then when he'd get up on the pulpit, not a real good speaker, but and then you would hear this other side of him, like breeding with like, and those stinking niggers, and all these racist slurs and so on and so forth. So before the cross lighting, people would dress up. So there KKK people there, and they would dress up in preparation for the cross lighting. Here we're talking to Pastor Butler. There's the original skinhead with his back there. Women there again are just kind of sitting off, kind of peripheral to what's going on. These are just some of the things that we picked up while we're there. So again, the reference to mud people, people of color. And again, anti-gay, a bridging issue with the religious right. This is kind of interesting. Skinheads actually, didn't start out racist. They were actually disenchanted young unemployed workers in England, and only later did some of the youth who were racist take on, the appearance and the dress of the skinheads. But there's racist skins, but then there are sharp skins, and the acronym SHARP stands for Skinheads Against Racist Prejudice. But these guys changed it to Scum Hanged After Racists Prevail. So they're always saying that, those interracial mixers, when we come into power, if we come into power, we're going to hang them. That's what we're going to do. This, a student in 93 or 94, I believe it was, brought it to me here at SKC. And at the time, somebody had placed, I can't remember how many of these, 150, 200 in papers that were just stacked and put on the corner in Ronan, and they put these flyers in there. I don't know if anybody remembers that or not. But at the time, there was a fellow who was in the anthropology department at the University of Montana, and I remember reading a lot in the Kaiman about this guy, and he was trying to start an Aryan youth movement at the University of Montana campus. So I'm not sure exactly what the meaning of the nudity is here, but I've asked a few people. They usually say innocence, purity. Who knows? Maybe the guy that made this, or was a pedophile. It's hard to say. But. So this is on the wall. Revelations of John, the four horsemen of the apocalypse, and of course you've got the stereotypic Scandinavian warrior there. At the end times. Watch out, here we come. Again, some of the images. This is out of a coloring book. Obviously very anti-black. I stole this off of, this was tacked up at the then new Performing Arts Building at the University of Montana. There's a play there on, I can't remember anything about the play, but it was years ago, and somebody tacked this up, but I stole it, and I thought, this is interesting. But again, trying to, I think, animalize blacks, the idea that they're not only animalizing, but the idea that they're lacking in intelligence. They breed indiscriminately like fruit flies, assimilating them to the world of animality. This, if a picture's worth 1,000 words, I think this will bring it home to you. It's a picture, it was on the wall there. So you've got the stereotypic ideal Teutonic knight warrior fighting against the hordes here who are assimilated to ape-like imagery, protecting the homeland and the maelstrom and the logo of the Aryan Nations. It's kind of interesting how that whole process of being able to kill somebody as long as they're stereotyped and treated as if they're less than human. It's a real interesting film here, actually, at the library called Faces of the Enemy by Sam Keane. It deals with that whole process of how you have to do that with your enemy if you want to avoid a lot of cognitive dissonance and killing your enemy. You have to treat them like they're less than human. You have to animalize them. Turn them into monsters. That's pretty small there, so you probably can't see that. The ultimate abomination, miscegenation. Now this is something we picked up. It's Nigger Shoot. Annual Convergence and Nigger Shoot to be held at Hayden Lake headquarters. They'll have an outdoor barbecue, chicken fly with plenty of watermelon for the best marksman, so on and so forth. We we ended up talking with a guy that left the group early in the 90s, and we asked him, we said, what is this? Is this for real? And he said no. He said it just, we just concocted up and put it out there for people to be amused. So here's a flyer against affirmative action. Again, they saw affirmative action as a sign of decay, decadence. And this might be the ideal, but it's not true at all. They use drugs. They use it on the compound. We all love Aryan children. This is out of the coloring book. At the end of the Saturday night, they get ready for the cross lighting, and what they'll do is they'll cut trees and make huge crosses. They'll make swastikas or other different symbols, and they wrap them in burlap and soak them in diesel oil. And they'll have this big field that's cleared, and they'll put these things up. This was a huge cross, huge. Rob Balch and I, at this point, we thought that they wouldn't be able to take over a nursing home, let alone the government. But we thought, well, if they can get this thing up, what an engineering feat, we'll have to reassess, the ability of this group. And one of the arms actually ended up breaking off. But this was a huge, huge cross. What they do is people who are KKK or neo-Nazis, they'll dress up. And after it's dark, everybody that's there will go out and create this big circle around these things. And Pastor Butler will give a short prayer, and then it's always a KKK who will light a torch, and then they'll go and light the crosses or swastikas. Or sometimes they'll have the S, like the SS. And then it's not a serious, somber time. It'll become kind of festive. People will want to get their pictures doing the Sig Heil in front of the crosses or whatever. But it was a good time that we would get a body count. Everybody's there, so everybody would count, and then we'd take an average to see what the attendance was like, at least for that event. So this, I think I shot this, I think this is the last cross lighting that I was at, actually. And here we have, so this is real typical. This is the triple cross. A lot of skinheads getting their picture taken in front of the crosses. When you ask them about the cross burning, and they say, no, it's not a cross burning, it's a cross lighting, and they say it hails back to early Scottish call to arms, that kind of like in Lord of the Rings trilogy, the last one, where they want to fight the forces of evil, and so they have a big pile of wood and they light the pile, and then somebody miles away on the top of another hill will light their pile. It'll be a signal, kind of a call to arms, and so they say that that's what it is. The idea is that the Aryan Nations group saw themselves as kind of an umbrella group that would bring people in from whether they're KKK or neo-Nazi or Christian identity or non-Christian identity, and somehow get them to forge a common direction in the movement. So here you have a number of neo-Nazis doing the Sig Heil. Some skinheads, neo-Nazis. I remember this night well because it was the same night that there were 20-some pieces of a comet were going to slam into Jupiter, and I could see Jupiter out in the sky. It was real bright. It was a beautiful night. And I was thinking I should be home watching that on TV, and I had to get a replay of it, but I was watching this stuff instead of the comet slam into Jupiter. KKK actually started out not as a racist group. It actually started out as kind of a fraternity in Reconstruction after the Civil War. Just a bunch of guys got together kind of in a fraternity and started, wearing things and covering their faces, and only later did it become, used by, for to try and get the blacks back into shape. So, but the uniform has evolved over time also. You can see here, this is one of the old traditional type uniform. And then the march here, the march, equal rights for American whites. So you see that kind of idea of reverse discrimination, you know, affirmative action. So this was the first march. If I remember right, there were about 65 people that marched that day. Mainly men, a couple of female skinheads. This was down the streets of Coeur d'Alene. There you see a couple ladies, young ladies. There's Pastor Butler flanked by some of his staff. There were thousands and thousands of people out there, and I saw more law enforcement than I've ever seen in my life. There were more media there. It was just amazing. I've never been in a place that had such energy. Anything could have just tipped the balance. It was they were stopping people and frisking people, and people were yelling obscenities, and it could have ignited. It could have been a real bad scene. And actually, the march was over with, and they had area cordoned off, and all the marchers were, maybe about a third of a block away. And I was standing there was a woman had a baby in a carriage, and there was a guy standing next to me, a young guy. And I was just kind of watching, and this young guy picked up a rock. He had a rock, it was about like that. And he threw it at the marchers. And we had been on a compound that weekend. Pastor Butler said, you know, don't be the first to draw blood, but if anybody draws blood, go for it. And I thought, oh boy, here we go. And my first thought was, you know, they're going to be coming this way, and somehow I've got to deal with, I got to get this kid out of here somehow, or protect the kid. And I watched that rock go, and the guy was standing there, and it missed him by about that far. Nobody even saw the rock. Just grazed him. And it was that close to that whole thing just coming loose, coming unglued. Luckily it didn't. This guy was just part of it. They had SWAT teams there. It was unbelievable. But I thought his name was funny, and I went over and I said, I like your name. And he looked at me like, I'd like to rip your head off. Mr. White at the races. I bet he got a lot of ribbon, yeah. So this was the end of this whole thing. Let's see, it was actually the night of the Triple Cross lighting. And it was with the first march down Coeur d'Alene. There was a Jewish guy there in the streets of Coeur d'Alene. He had a megaphone, and he said, yeah, me and my Jewish buddies are going to come and overrun the campground tonight. His name is Irv Rubin. And he was just taunting everybody. And, so that was, we probably saw the compound more paranoid that night than any night before. There were guys walking around with baseball bats and shotguns, and nothing happened. There was just a lot of tension, and we went and camped out about a mile away at an RV campground. But I guess about 1 or 2 in the morning, supposedly what happened was a Native American woman and her 20-some-year-old son, who supposedly had just gotten out of like Job Corps or something, supposedly were driving down the road, and her son supposedly went to throw his ID card out. He had just completed the Job Corps, and he was going to throw it out the window, but supposedly somehow he threw his wallet out. So they stopped, and they came back, and then they were taken off. But supposedly something happened. It might have been fireworks, or maybe a pop with the car, or whatever. The 3 of the staff people there thought they heard gunfire. So they get in the car, they see this car going down the road, they chase the car, they start shooting at it, they run the car off the road, and then they run up, this one guy runs up and puts a gun to the Native American woman's head, holds her head, and who knows what might have happened. But there was a car that happened to come, so he didn't do anything. And he said, they boogied out of there. He said, don't tell anybody, I've got your number, your license number. Well, based on that, let's see, I guess that happened, that was in 1998. 1999, Morris Dees from the Southern Poverty Law Center filed suit against the Aryan Nations. Based on that, they went to trial in 2000. Trial was held in Spokane. They went for close to $12 million. They got judgment in, I think it was $3.6 million. Effectively shut down the Aryan Nations. They got the name, they got the property, they got the land, they got everything. They couldn't even use the word Aryan Nations at that point. She ended up, the woman and the son ended up selling the land, and they just bulldozed everything down. But after that, they had a final march through Coeur d'Alene. It was a real cold fall day, and we went over. And you can see very few people out. The marchers are there, but the mayor of Coeur d'Alene symbolically had a water truck ahead of the marchers and a water truck behind the marchers, and he said symbolically it's kind of washing away the filth. So anyway, so that's a good way to end the presentation. So, thank you. If anybody has any questions?
Well, how would they define who was white and who was not?
How do they? Well, so they based everything on, Christian identity based everything on, again, those members of the Aryan Nations racist group. Aryan supposedly means the noble ones, but they allegedly were the Northern Europeans, Western Europeans, Scandinavians. So that was kind of their, that members of those European nations were Aryans. They were the epitome of, I guess you could say, whiteness. But they were also seen as descendants of the 10 lost tribes of Israel. Southern Europeans weren't, Eastern Europeans weren't. And I don't know, I'm sure it gets pretty elaborate, but I didn't spend a lot of time on it. Yeah.
Group Kalispell is similar anymore with regular web messages going on, inviting people to come here because it's back to this is the last place of no mixture, pure white.
Yeah.
Chuck Baldwin was one of the people who came in from Florida, another minister who came to be the governor of Montana and get us all straightened out here.
Yeah.
But their message was not regular.
It's still happening. It's not over with.
The interlake was one that kind of blows your arteries out. You get a clear view.
Yeah, they had you probably read the article in the Independent a month or two ago about what's going on up in that area. Yeah, they like coming here. Well, because there's a number of things. One thing is because it is we don't have a lot of minorities. Another thing is there's a statement in the Bible somewhere that says in the end times go to the mountains. Gun laws are relatively I don't know that much about guns and gun laws, but not a lot of rules and regulations in Montana. So and it's kind of I think Montana's kind of just don't live and let live. Don't bother people. Just don't hinder people for the most part. So yeah, so I think who knows what's going to happen up there. Yeah, it's if I was young and really had the interest, I'd probably be doing I wouldn't mind doing some research up there.
There was an interesting movement maybe 10 years ago or so. There really was a lot of activity. There was a gal who was previously in law enforcement, got crossways with somebody, and people were stalking her daughter coming from work and just all crazy things going on. People appeared in her house. So a group got together, really inspired by the Not in Our Town, the movement in Billings when the rock went through the window with them. There was a group of Kalispell did much the same thing. It was hands against feet. Yeah. Did T-shirts and it was interesting to see the community rise.
Yeah, there's been an actual, I think, like 400% increase in threats, increase in a lot of these racist groups. I know Montana has probably more exposure than I've ever been aware of. I think there's something like 12 or 13 groups in. There's one offshoot of Matt Hale's Church of the World Creator. There's quite a few different chapters of that. There's KKK here. We've got a couple people who left Aryan Nations way back in the early 90s, came over to establish Church of Jesus Christ Christian in Montana up out of Noxon. They're still up there somewhere. They've changed the name, but so yeah, we've got a black president. We've got massive social, economic change. Times like that, I think it brings all this stuff out of the woodwork. People are afraid. People are afraid, and And a lot of energies, I think, are being focused now, obviously because we have Obama as president. A lot of people see that as a threat. So, yeah.
You mentioned the view they had on Native Americans because Butler, they had been Native. Is that common among all white supremacists or just the group in Idaho? I haven't. The group in Idaho were primarily, we talked to a lot of people who weren't really necessarily really intertwined with the group in Idaho. And probably I would have to say that most people that I talked to were followers of Christian identity, and as far as they go, they really didn't have anything to say against Native Americans, and like I said, but you had this feeling that they didn't want to, it was a touchy subject. They never brought it up themselves. And they'd say blacks are mud people, or Asians are mud people, people of color, but never ever brought them. It never would say Native Americans. And so we started asking, saying, well, where do Native Americans fit in this? And that's when a couple of people said, oh yeah, some of the groups, particularly the CH groups back east, they're members of the they're members of the Aryan Nations racist group. And I don't know the connections. We never really got the connections. A lot of this stuff, as far as why they think that, I'm not really sure. I always wanted to ask Butler and, say, are you Native American? But I just didn't have the guts to do that.
Did you
Get off the compound. No.
did you ever have any restrictions on the photographs that you could take?
Yeah, we were told, don't take any photographs of people unless you ask ahead of time. And so we tried to do that. Actually,